I would like to bring on my next guest another person I am always enamored to talk to, Koffi Kouakou. He's an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies in the University of Johannesburg. Kofi, my man, how you doing today? You doing
Yes,
all right?
I'm doing right. Gosh, you would have let me talk to Dr. Frost there. I would have taken on China there. For
Oh,
goodness sake.
you wanted to have a go at him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
I
I
mean, look,
mean,
he's an American economist. They have a certain
yeah,
view of China.
he-
I'm greatly doubtful of what Mark
yeah.
said.
I'm glad you put it out there because it's just, I mean, the evidence doesn't show much of what he's saying.
Yeah, I
You
don't buy
know,
the
even
premise.
the Economist magazine that still calls itself the Journal, for the past 30 or some 20, 30 years, they've been talking about China, the fall of China. China
Yep.
is going to be, fragmented, and nothing has happened so far.
Yeah.
And the
I mean,
evidence
look,
is
they
still
used to say
showing that.
Russia's running out of weapons. Russia's
Thank
fighting
you.
with shovels. It's like they just say this all the time, right? Oh, the Russian
Yes,
economy is going to collapse. Russia's like
yes.
fourth in the world.
Yeah, I had this conversation with some guy from the Washington think tank once on a sort of Dubai TV take station. My goodness, I know on CGTN once, I think two
Uh,
years ago. He almost, bit my head because I said that the Russian economy was strong. And I had to quote him from the World Bank data, but he still didn't believe it. And he was coming out with his own data. And I said, my goodness,
yeah.
you know?
And I just remember they were like, Russia's running out of missiles. Russia's fighting with
Yeah,
shovels, right?
yeah.
Russia is taking what is it, chips out of washing machines. Like they were saying all of this
Yes,
stuff.
that's right.
And it's
Right.
like, where are you getting this from? Like it's like to just make this stuff up. No, Mark is a
Yeah.
good friend of the show. I definitely appreciate him for
Yes.
coming on.
No, it's
And
always good to have different views on the show.
yeah,
It's excellent.
absolutely.
Mm,
This is not an echo
mm.
chamber. Whether I agree with the
Yeah.
person or disagree with the person, like I have him on to talk to him. I wanted to talk to him about the tariff thing though, because like I said, I thought him and I were going to have a very different point of view on the tariff issue. We'll
Yes.
see. I mean, look, if the U.S. was one of those countries that we had a leader for 16 years, okay,
Mm,
maybe like because like I was listening to this guy who was talking about parts and how there were machine type parts that you just couldn't get in America, that you couldn't get it made, couldn't get it built, that many of the industries in America just can't necessarily create. I think to Mark's point, well, we want those industries back in America. And if you had a period of time where you could basically inflict pain on the
mm,
American public and American businesses where they are forced to bring those industries back, then you're better off
mm.
for the long term.
Yeah.
We don't have that political system. Like we flip back and forth, and the policies.
But even, Jamal, even if you did, it would take a little more than the term of President Trump to come over. It's going to take
Yeah,
a bit of time because America doesn't have the speed of execution as China and Russia. This is the
right.
thing that very few people are talking about, that sort of centralized focus on direct order, disciplined, and get things done. You
Yeah,
always have little things, environmental laws, people that come in. I mean, look at the legal system, how long it takes to get to a judgment, for example, unless
yeah.
it's political. So that's going to be it's going to take time for all
By the
this
way, Build Back Better plan is a really good example. Like, in
yeah,
order for it was like you had to send it to the state, then the state had to come up with their own idea, and then there was somebody who came in and criticized what the state was doing, and then the state has to come up with a new proposal, and then the federal government got there. I mean, nothing got accomplished. Like they couldn't even
yeah,
build like an electrical station. It was
yeah.
ridiculous. Just
And
absurd.
and it's
Um,
still and it's still hovering somewhere there. It hasn't really moved. They're
hasn't
trying to
moved.
move. They're trying to get the Europeans to buy into it. The Europeans probably will say, "Yeah, let's do it," but nothing is moved.
Yeah. Kofi, I want you on. For one, the tariffs on South Africa, we should talk
Yeah.
about.
Mm.
Because apparently that number, where is that number? I have that sheet somewhere. Here we are. The tariff,
30%.
30%.
Yeah.
30%. And the way
Mm.
apparently that they came up with the number is
The
that they,
formula. Yeah.
so the formula ended up being, it says they didn't calculate trade barriers. Instead, every country, they took the trade deficit with the
Yes.
country and divided by the exports to the United
From
States.
that country, yes. So in South Africa, I think the trade deficit was 8.8 billion, and then the export to the US was 14.7. So when you did the division, it comes down to something like 0.59 something something. So rounded up to 60. So roughly 60%, right?
That is,
Then what people are asking themselves is, how in the world did they come up to divide it in two and split it in two and give 30% to South Africa? What
yeah.
was the rationale that informed that division to half of 60%? And so it's really strange in how this thing came about. But it's having some really nice debate here down in South Africa.
Well, that's what I want to get into. What is the debate in South Africa? But look, from my premise, I think many of these countries are going to tell Trump to F off. I
Yeah.
don't think they want a trade war, but I don't think that China, I don't think the European Union, like countries of this scale, are going to, and then the European Union is not a country, it's a collection of countries. But you get my point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that these countries are going to, for one, I don't think they like Trump. Two, I think they have some feelings about Trump ending the world order in the way that it has been. The United States has been a main proponent of globalism across the globe. Like that's been out. We are the capitalist country. This is the thing that we believe in. And then
Yeah.
Trump comes and says, you know what? Globalism sucks. It's not doing it for us. We need to change it. Now, he may not be wrong, but the way he is doing this is so boisterous and so
Yeah.
in the face, where it's like,
Mm.
yeah, we're going to just have a trade war against the world.
Yeah.
And if the world says F off, then what? What is the debate taking place in South Africa? And I want to put this in the context of BRICS, because South
Mm.
Africa is not necessarily alone anymore. South Africa has other trading partners that it's working with: Brazil, India, China, Russia, etc. Indonesia being another one of those countries. What is the
Yeah.
conversation in South Africa? How are you guys dealing with it?
People are, they're not just stunned, but they're now becoming numb because they know there's this feeling, this wave of negativity coming from Washington. It's not about the United States per se or the citizens, but from a new government that seems not to be well educated about what's happening in South Africa. Again, I mean, if I'm sure you listened to President Trump singled out South Africa. It said things are still bad there. They're doing something terrible. I didn't quote him exactly, but he left the impression that still things are terrible. Well, there are terrible things around the world, same as here, of course. I mean, we can't deny this. We're going through a terrible electricity drought, outages, and sometimes water
I'm
issues,
sorry to interrupt,
villages.
Kofi, but that's not what Trump means. Trump means that you
Yeah,
guys are apparently killing white folks,
I
stealing your
know.
property.
I
Yeah.
was coming to that point. His focus is on more on the minority white people than everybody else. I mean, he has yet to even say anything good about South Africa since he came to power. Well, in his first term, he didn't say anything better about Africa, ranging from that shift whole comment he made to now with a very specific focus on South Africa. So the way this whole thing's going is that, first of all, I think South Africans more and more understanding that it's Trump against the world and that there's a global tariff war that is launching and kickstarting. That's going to lead to a huge trade war. And out of this big blob global issue, South Africa is now being focused and it's singled out, and fairly, especially because Trump is not having that education about the country. And even if you were to ask President Trump, what's the size of South Africa? What is the population of South Africa? And in fact, if you were to ask him what's the population of the white people he's supporting here, he wouldn't be able to even tell you. Well, I'm pushing it a bit, but that is something people are saying. Trump doesn't know much about South Africa. And there is speculation that he may not even come to the G20 summit in November, which summit is going to lead to passing the baton to the United States to deal with the next G20 in 2026, which will be a shame because he might send his vice president, J.D. Vance, or some kind of low-level secretary of commerce or something, Vance. And that's going to be something like that. But for the 30%, as we just spoke about the formula, I mean, the whole world thinks the formula is really rigged. I mean, I'm sure you've heard James Sirowiecki, the famous journalist who used to write for I think he used to write for the New Yorker on economic issues. He just flagged this out and became really important. People are now paying attention. How did you get to that formula? And then for South Africa, from that 60% to 30%, but even 30% is very high. And so South Africans not only are puzzled, but they're worried about the consequences. Economic consequences, you and I have discussed it. AGOA is involved in it. The Africa Opportunity, Act, very complicated program, but very interesting for Africans. Although there are 30 African countries that were eligible, only 10 were benefiting from it. But even 10, that's still a lot of money. And so there are 100,000 people who will be affected if in September, I think it ends in September, it comes up for renewal in September, I think the 30th, 2025, this year. So if South Africa is out of it, it's going to be a tough one economically for people who've been benefiting from it for a while. And then it might also have a sort of reputational impact on South Africa in the sense that if South Africa can't do business with a good, big capitalist country, who can trust it? But I doubt this because most countries are now under US attack. And that is giving a little bit of coverage to South Africa. But it's not enough because the consequences will be dire. Economically, politically already, as you know, there are two congressmen who are already filing an act to review the relationship between South Africa and the United States. Let's say the United States and South Africa. It's been going on since the Joe Biden's administration. So it's nothing new, but they're pushing it very hard. But the subtext, we already know it. Even this new sort of act is at the end of it, slightly putting the ICJ, South Africa ICJ genocide case against Israel. So that's the subtext that we're reading all and on and on. Although people don't want to talk about it, but this is the main point because South Africa hasn't done anything else to the United States. South Africa hasn't attacked the United States, but the case of Israel becomes a very important one. And then I think politically as well, it's going to have some impact because some opposition parties really love the United States. And it seems like the US has got some asset here and minions that are really rooting for it. So it doesn't matter whatever the US does, these political parties will always preach the US narrative.
Really?
And it's not
Even
easy.
after this? I mean,
Yes,
Trump is
yes,
effectively trying to destroy the South African economy
yes,
with his
yes.
tariffs.
Some of them will. Although there are a few of them that are recognizing publicly that, look, President Trump is misinformed and so forth. But still, that whiteness seems to be connecting with them. And they love somebody helping them and playing and supporting them. I think it is something we want to dismiss. But after a while, I started to say, wait a minute, I can't keep dismissing this. There must be something there. That's really the oiling parts that's connecting these people. And I think this is where we are. And South Africans, I mean, they woke up again. Today, since Trump announced this thing, the liberation day, we're hoping it's really going to liberate the United States. But we're hearing a lot of bad news already in London. Apparently, there are about 2 trillion pounds that are getting off somewhere where people are losing money because they're not trusting the United States anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a
So
serious issue.
wow. Look, I agree with you that the Israel thing plays a big role in the South Africa going at basically South Africa putting their warrant, or let's say making the papers for the ICJ, and for the ICJ to basically agree with what South
Mhm.
Africa is saying Israel needs to unravel these open
Yeah,
air ghettos and these basically
never
their
seen.
colonial holdings. Agreed.
Yeah,
And the US effectively being an Israel first country, I mean, call it what it is. I think even Mark would agree with that, considering what they're doing in Yemen and what they're threatening Iran, neither
Mhm.
of which are threatening the United States. I mean, hell, even in that signal leak, JD Vance was like, only 3% of US shipping goes through the Red Sea. Why do we care? Why is this our
Mhm.
issue? Well, it's our issue because Israel wants it to be our issue. And
Yeah,
so I don't doubt in the least that part of this, oh, they're killing white people and stealing their land. And this attack, this relentless, continuous, random attacks on South Africa has everything to do with that ICJ warrant, as opposed to anything South Africa did in and of itself. What is South Africa going to do about this? Like, what is, like, for example, do you know if the BRICS nations have had a conversation? I mean, I know this just came out last night, but I would imagine that the BRICS nations will come together and come up with a cohesive strategy as opposed to individual nations. Kind of like China, South Korea, and Japan saying, okay, we're going to work together to figure out what we're going to do, as opposed to being individual actors being picked off. Is South Africa looking to its BRICS associates, or is it looking to deal with this on its own?
This is an excellent question that many of us have been asking ourselves, and a lot of people also asking themselves, what's next?
Right.
Because we know this is the beginning. After 2 or 3 months, I think Trump has been in power now for what, 60 or something, since January and March. That's roughly about close, going towards 100 days or so. And with the sort of snowball attack on South Africa, people are saying, you need to rethink this relationship. Of course, there are people who are still, they're having the diplomatic hat on. Well, we're working around with the United States. The regular diplomatic nonsense that sometimes really gets you also in trouble, because the more you talk softly without a strong stick in your hands, which South Africa doesn't have, the more you get into, you're going to have to cow down to whatever the US is going to say. We're hoping we're not going to see that, but it is sure that South Africa is going to be bullied. But people are also worried about the lack of a visible South African strategy. That's first for South Africa. A visible strategy to really face up to what is coming, what is already there and what is coming, how South Africa is going to be able to face up to that and get out of it, or find ways to strengthen its not only political diplomatic situation, geo-economic situation, but also seriously internal issues to sort out in South Africa. Because economically, South Africa is not growing at all, so it's not a good sign. So somebody can use that as a vulnerability to continuously attack South Africa. That's one. And the fragmentation, the racial fragmentation between white and blacks is starting to fess out a little bit with time. If the US attacks us really strongly enough, it's going to start growing, because we can see it. These are not easy issues. In the US, it's almost the same. As soon as there's a little racial, rift, it's easier to grow it very quickly. But South Africa we haven't seen, at least publicly, a strategy, but it's coming. It's becoming more and more an imperative to say South Africa must develop a strategy to really face up to what's coming to it from the United States. Because the US has had a US strategy before under the Joe Biden with Anthony Blinken, who launched it in July 2022 with great fanfare here in Pretoria, but it didn't go anywhere. And I think President Trump will probably put his people together. And as you probably know already, he has a new special envoy for Africa, a Lebanese-American-born Boulos, Massad Boulos, who incidentally seemed to have done some stint in Africa, especially in Nigeria, where he was running a big company, a logistics company. He studied, in fact, in the US, in Texas, and so forth. And his wife was born in, I think, in Nigeria, somewhere there, something like that. But in any case, no, in Burkina Faso. Sorry, in Burkina Faso. So very interesting. So he has a sort of way in Africa, but hopefully that new Africa strategy, if it is going to come out, I hope it does, must be coherent enough. But Boulos, this special envoy, has already visited the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. He's also going to go to, I think, Kenya, and about Rwanda as well. And as you know, the US got some serious interest there. Well,
Yes.
you and I, we'll talk a little bit about that later. But key to it is, to answer your question, is that South Africa hasn't yet, at least opening talked about a BRICS strategy, but I'm sure they are talking to each other. South Africa is probably talking to Russia, but the BRICS haven't been strong enough as a collective team because of some of the weak links. South Africa, India. India is sort of very much all over the place at times. I mean, India is buying arms from Russia, but yet selling arms to Europeans to attack Russia and Ukraine. Some confusion somewhere there. In any case, there's two strongest, countries in the BRICS. Of course, China and Russia. They're doing
Mhm.
extraordinarily well. And then, of course, they're now linking up with Iran. And Iran is also said to have some sort of underground relationship with South Africa. So South Africa is going to have to do something very quickly to strengthen its back, both militarily, because it's very, very weak there, as well as economically. That's also very weak, even socially. So there's so many vulnerability for South Africa until the only strength that South Africa is going to have and has is the steady rise of not rebellion but anger, you know, against what the US is doing. And you can hear that in the radios every day, in the mornings, in the afternoon. People are talking about it. I think that's the only thing that South Africa has got, in addition, of course, to the moral strength at the ICJ against Israel. South Africa is still a bit weak and vulnerable. That's what I could say.
Anger is a virtue. Anger can be a virtue. Um, I
Bring
guess,
people.
like in this case, or righteous indignation. Maybe I should say more so than anger. I
Mm,
am like I got to be honest. I'm fascinated by this. Like
mm,
nobody expected Trump to do this. Nobody voted for this.
yeah.
And even if I give him the benefit of the doubt in saying that, because I agree with Mark in this case, that Trump is trying to reshape the global economy to the best interests of America, noticing that globalism hasn't necessarily, is no longer our benefit. But keep in mind, though, like this is pretty outrageous. When J.D. Vance gave that speech, J.D. Vance pointed out in the speech that he believed that Western countries, when they set up the globalism thing, would always stay on top, almost like in perpetuity, that they would just remain the richest and the most powerful. And that somewhere along the way, countries like China started being able to develop and make the same products and make them with more industrial might behind it. And that Western countries started falling behind. And as an example of that, the US kept saying China was stealing their information, stealing their data, and all this other stuff. Europe recently wanted China to give it help for their technology, basically having the same plan that China did. If you produce your products in the country, you need to show us how to do it because we don't necessarily want to always be just the producers. We want to also understand the technology and grow our own economies. Europe is now saying the same thing to China, which is pretty astonishing. Like that's such a turn. Now, when China did it, we said they were stealing intellectual property. Of course, when Europe is trying to do it, it's just an exchange of information.
Oh,
I guess the
the
same
other
thing.
word, the other word was overcapacity.
Yeah, yeah,
Do you remember that?
yeah. I guess my thing
But
is
Europe
so.
is Europe is now making a soft shift toward China. We've heard this week that Europe is now developing its own strategy, talking to the Chinese and how they can do business again.
Well, see, that's the other part of these tariffs. That's why I think it's a risk because other countries could say, okay, the US is becoming unstable. A, we don't like Donald Trump. Yes, it's an economy, all things being equal, we will want to trade with. However, we do not want to be put under the thumb of this man child who is trying to dominate as opposed to actually trade. I mean, Trump is not looking for equal exchange. Trump is looking for advantage. Those are different things. Whereas China is looking for a win-win relationship. If Europe is like, all right, America has become unstable, maybe we need to migrate to somewhere else. Maybe we need to look and put our irons somewhere else. China might be that market. I mean, I could be wrong. Yeah, I could be wrong. I'm
I
just
mean, there's China, there's also Latin America, and there's a big one, Africa. And what the Chinese have been doing is they've been putting the pipes which means the infrastructure necessary to develop a market where they can dump their goods. And that's really coming. I mean, remember last year, after all these sanctions that the United States and Europeans put on China, China managed to grow its trade relationship with its BRICS partners by 33%. Tomorrow,
Wow.
this is huge. So that means that, and then it's even more open. If they can do that more and more, I mean, they'll reduce their engagement, their trade engagement with the United States to, I think, to 15 or 14, 15 to 16% or so. And they just want to try doing this. And slowly they'll find markets where they can dump their resources. And we know the prejudices, confirmation bias says that, oh, Africa is not a big market, there's nothing here. I mean, we've heard it for so many decades. They'll probably say the same for Latin America, but these markets are growing. The Asian market is also growing. So there will be some shift where the US will be isolated economically very soon without even noticing it.
Well, Koffi, we will see. I mean, the reality of it is we will see how this turns out within the coming months, whether the markets tank, whether these other actors effectively bend the knee. We'll see if Trump is right in his belief that he can effectively change the world order. I am just super skeptical that he could do this. But Koffi, man, I really appreciate it. Koffi Kouakou, he's an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, and a damn good friend of the show. Thank you, Koffi. Be safe, man.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.